good evening to all of you. My name is Jehan A. Usman, and it is a privilege to share with you my research entitled Interpersonal Relationships in Post-Conflict Governance, the Case of Bangsamoro. So post-conflict governance is often framed in terms of institutional capacity, legal frameworks, and formal peace agreements. However, this lens tends to overlook a critical element, which is the human relationships. So in societies emerging from violent conflicts, trust has been broken, not only between the institutions, but also between the individuals themselves. So in the case of Bangsamoro Transition Authority or BTA, we see a remarkable experiment in transitional governance. A parliament composed of members from historically opposing groups. So they compose of the former rebel groups, that is the Moro Islamic Liberation Front or MILF, and the Moro National Liberation Front or MNLF, Christians, and indigenous peoples called as Lumads, working together to govern a region long scarred by insurgency, displacement, violence, and mistrust. So this study explores an often overlooked yet deeply influential dimension of governance in post-conflict settings, which is the role of interpersonal relationships and friendships. Centering on the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao in the Philippines, and specifically the Bangsamoro Transition Authority or BTA, which is now the current interim government of the BARM during the transition period. This research examines how interpersonal relationships rooted in trust, friendship, and shared history shape key processes of governance and influence policymaking, including decision-making, collaboration, and conflict resolution. So by framing these dynamics within the broader discussion of hybrid peace building, this research suggests that the formal institutions alone do not account for the complexities of the political transition. Rather, it is the everyday relational practices among the political actors that often determines the success or fragility of the post-conflict governance. So the Bangsamoro case offers valuable insights into how peace is not only negotiated at the table but also nurtured through the relationships built over time. So interpersonal relationships play a crucial role in the post-conflict governance, shaped by shared experiences, identities, and historical grievances. So these relationships have a dual-edged nature. So while they can foster solidarity within groups, they can also deepen divisions between them. So in diverse post-conflict societies, shared ethnic or religious identities can strengthen in-group bonds, but also create barriers to collaboration with the other groups, complicating efforts to rebuild relationship and foster inclusivity. Scholars have long emphasized its dual-edged nature in post-conflict settings. However, there are limited research that examines their specific impact on the transitional governance. So this dual nature of interpersonal relationships underscores the importance of recognizing both the structural and human elements in peace building. So it is not just about formal institution, it's about how interpersonal connections shape and sustain governance. So the success of the Bangsamoro's transition hinges on investing in both institutional reforms and the relational fabric that binds the communities together. So to explore this relational dynamic, I employed a qualitative research approach by gathering data through interviews, open-ended questionnaires, and observation, focusing on the members of the diverse ethno-religious background. So the participants were selected through purposive sampling. They are the members of the parliament who have served the BTA between 2019 and 2025. So specifically, the first phase of BTA transition period is from 2019 to 22 rather. Thereafter, the BTA transition period was further extended from 2022 to 2025, which is now the second phase of the transition. Now, let me walk you through the key findings of the research. So in the early phase of the BTA transition from 2019 to 2022, governance was slowed down by deep-rooted mistrust. So the parliament members aligned along minority and majority blocks, echoing political divisions and past allegiances. However, over time, this began to shift. So through ongoing interaction, shared legislative work, and informal conversations, the members started to build a personal relationships that crossed factional lines. So by the second phase of the transition, the minority and the majority blocks was abolished. So this is a major symbolic and structural change that signaled the importance of unity and cooperation. And what emerged surprised even the MPs themselves. Personal trust began to replace political division. So one of the most profound metaphors shared by an MP during our interview described trust as an emotional bank account. So every positive interaction, every respectful dialogue was a deposit. Over time, these deposits created enough capital to sustain constructive policy making, and this trust improved collaboration and communication inside the parliament. Also, friendship and informal ties, often rooted in shared revolutionary history, kinship, or ethnic background, greatly influence decision making. So MPs shared that they often relied on personal connections when negotiating legislation, seeking advice, or lobbying for support. So this helped reduce bureaucracy, enhance communication, and build coalitions. So in the post-conflict societies, these agreements can quickly escalate. But in the BTA, interpersonal relationships help create a culture of conflict de-escalation. So the MPs describe how simple gestures like dialogue over the coffee, spontaneous hallway talks, or even chats in the pantry or snack room in the BTA Parliament Session Hall were often more effective than formal debate in resolving the tension. So these relational mechanisms become essential in managing diversity within the BTA. So the members no longer saw each other merely as former adversaries, but as a partners in transition, united by a shared mission. So cross-sector friendships built through informal social interactions, mentorships, and active listening allow these groups to collaborate on inclusive legislation that address the needs of the diverse population. So the MPs shared that friendship helped transcend identity politics and that the success of the transition depended on the collective mindset that they are in this together. So they started to see each other as a beyond group identities. As one of the members of the parliament noted, they started to see each other as equal, and that shift made space for more inclusive governance. Of course, interpersonal relationships are not without risk. Several MPs acknowledge that delicate balance between friendships and professional obligations. There were moments when personal ties tempted favoritism or blurred lines of accountability, but many members of BTA matured into this responsibility, so they learned to choose their battles wisely, setting boundaries and upholding ethical standards. So their goal was not to erase personal relationship from governance, but to ensure that relationships strengthened rather than compromise institutional integrity. So with the stronger personal connections, legislation moved faster. The people were more willing to negotiate, more open to compromise, and more trusting of each other's intention. So this was not simply about being friendly. It was about how interpersonal trust helped reduce political friction. So when the MPs trusted each other, they didn't question every motive. They didn't stall proceedings. They worked towards solution. In other words, the personal trust made the formal systems work better. So ultimately, what we witnessed was not just a personal growth, but an institutional transformation. So early misinterpretation rooted in political history gave way to mutual understanding. So the BTA evolved from a fragmented assembly to a collective force, united not just by a mandate but by trust. And in that trust lies the power of interpersonal relationships. They enabled compromise. They encourage mentorship. They accelerated legislation, and they made governance work. So in conclusion, this study underscores a critical lesson for post-conflict governance. that interpersonal relationships are not peripheral but foundational. So they influence not just whether laws are passed, but whether people can heal, trust, and rebuild after the years of violence. So in the case of Bangsamoro, relationships rooted in respect, empathy, and shared purpose have helped bridge divides that institution alone could not. So trust, communication, and interpersonal relationships were not only emotional needs, but they become a political tools essential for governance, conflict resolution, and realization of peace. Let us remember that peace building is not only about laws and institution, it is about relationships. And as the Bangsamoro case shows, it is through these relationships that real transformation becomes possible. Thank you very much, and I welcome your questions.